Whoops, people don't care that my class is starting soon.
Your class is starting soon?
I don't know if you can see the YouTube stream, but I have a waiting screen for my class as well.
Okay. Are you streaming your class on YouTube?
No, but I use OBS actually to teach, because then it makes it really easy to put my camera next to like a slide deck, and then switch between like MATLAB and slides and web forms and stuff like this. Anyway, so that's what I'm doing.
So I guess you're doing all virtual then, sounds like, this semester.
No, there's a mix of stuff. I mean, this was leftover. I taught last year, online, so a lot of it is left over from that. But I do have like some component that's like online and some component that's in person this semester.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, we don't have any viewers yet, which is fine. So I don't have anybody to ask about this audio. Anyway, why don't we get started?
Okay.
And then let me text Lisa, and then I can like tell her to join and ask if the music is actually working. All right. So, welcome everybody. I don't have any viewers yet, but that's okay. Welcome. My name is Chris. I'm a professor in Earth Sciences, and I'm trying to do a whole lot of videos and content about graduate school in general. And so today I'm having a guest for sort of have a discussion around, choosing a graduate program and how you would go about, deciding where to attend. And so my guest today, I'd like to welcome Grace Windler, newly minted doctor, to the show. Welcome, Grace.
Thanks, Chris.
So you were both, recently we were both at the University of Arizona. So you've been there both for your master's degree and then a PhD. And you graduated, it's completely finished right now. Like the paperwork is in, right? It's like...
Yeah. I have my diploma and everything. Just sent it to me.
I remember it took me like 6 months to get mine in the mail after I graduated. But yeah, congratulations. Yeah. Newly minted, you study paleoclimate. Do you want to give a very short description of like what your work was on during your PhD?
Sure. So, my research was paleoclimate, as Chris mentioned, but I used specifically organic geochemical proxies. So I used fossil molecules in marine sediments to reconstruct, climate variables from the past. And the focus of a lot of my research was tropical climate variability, and specifically sort of the Indonesia region, which is known as the warm pool. It's the area with the warmest sea surface temperatures on the planet today. And so trying to reconstruct kind of how circulation changed over that area for the last roughly 500,000 years.
Cool. Sounds interesting.
Yeah. I thought so.
That's right. I mean, you spent several years doing it. That's generally the hope, is that you like what you're doing.
Yeah.
All right. I've heard quickly from Lisa that there is no music. So And it's definitely on. Which is unfortunate. Okay, well, I don't actually know how to fix this. So yeah, I don't know. Anywho, let's move on. So I typically have like some general questions that I like to ask people because I'm interested, how they got into science and stuff. So sort of when did you decide that you wanted to, make science as a career choice?
Yeah, that kind of happened, I guess. That solidified maybe during undergrad. So I did my undergraduate degree at the University of New Mexico, just as some background, I guess. But I was simultaneously studying film and geology. And but I had always liked, even in high school and like middle school and stuff, I'd always like really enjoyed math and science classes. And eventually I figured out that science was actually applied math. Math just seemed too like theoretical for me, that I just like was frustrated with not really understanding the point. And so science was the point. And so I really enjoyed kind of all these natural science classes that I took. And that kind of continued on in undergrad as I was getting my bachelor's. And so I took, a lot of geology classes. And just, I was really interested in how kind of the natural world worked a little bit. And when I finished my bachelor's, knew I wanted to do something related to natural science because I enjoyed it so much. But I wasn't sure what that was. And so I, in the back of my head, thought the next step might be grad school, but I actually took a couple years in between my undergrad and going to grad school to look for a science-related job. I took like an office job because I couldn't find another one. So I took an office job while I was trying to look for, more of something related to what I wanted to do, and which I didn't know exactly what that was, but and 2 years went by and I was my soul was slowly crushing under the office work I was doing. And so I just decided that I would go to grad school to sort of pursue, geoscience related material research. Yeah.
So
I don't know if there's like an aha moment, but it was just something I'd always been interested in. And it kept my brain working. So it interested me.
So, can you walk me through that process of making the decision to go to grad school, like in the first place? Like, sort of like what influences did you have at the time? Were you still in contact with like undergrad professors, for example, who could give you advice, or did you know other people who went to grad school already, or sort of like what helped you get to that decision?
Yeah, so my senior year of undergrad, I kind of thought that maybe I had some grad students in my department that sort of encouraged me to think about grad school, and I never really seriously looked into it during my time there because I sort of had been in school for a long time and didn't really want to be a student any longer. But I kind of thought that maybe I would go to grad school sometime soon. And so preemptively, I sort of, my senior year of undergrad, took the GRE. Now less places are requiring that, which is good. But at the time I needed to take it. And I took the GRE while I was sort of in the middle of the school mindset. And and then I sort of like asked, I had no idea my department didn't really systematically like give any sort of resources about how to apply for grad school or like if you're interested in it. So I just kind of asked my TAs that were grad students in my department, was like, how do you do this? I don't even know how to do this. And so they kind of explained the process of thinking about what you're interested in, you know, contacting professors that could be prospective advisors that do kind of their research aligns with your interests, and, you know, emailing them before you actually apply is key. And so I kind of got a little bit of a rundown, and what I ended up doing too is I knew I was interested in paleoclimate, which is a very broad field. Then a lot of people were like, that's pretty broad, maybe you want to narrow it down, but I couldn't really because I was interested in a lot of different stuff. And the most narrow I could go step down from that was I want to use stable isotopes, which is also very broad. And so I talked to, you know, my professor at the time who did paleoclimate research, and she sort of suggested potential people to look into who did, you know, things along those lines. The list was pretty long and broad, but I at least got some like jumping off points from people in my department of like places to look into. And so I had all of those sort of stashed away for the couple years that I wasn't really thinking about it. And then when the time came, I kind of sent some emails to some of those people I talked to before. I also used Google a lot. I kind of was like, well, I don't know how to draft an email to just send to someone that I've never met before, asking about their research and saying I'm interested in potentially applying to go to school there. And so then I kind of like Googled and got advice on Google for, you know, professors who say like, these are examples of emails or things in emails that I don't like to receive, or, you know, you should attach your CV or at least, you know, have some kind of idea of what you might want to talk about and that kind of thing. So I definitely mostly Googled how to, I think at one point I was like, how do I apply for grad school? Just typed it into Google.
So how did you get, I mean, you mentioned it a little bit, but how did you get, you know, when you first were like, oh, I want to do paleoclimate, you know, was it the, like, what, did you have a good time in your college chemistry classes, or like sort of what funneled you into that bucket to begin with?
I think it was, yeah, during my sort of geology coursework in undergrad. I think there was a lot of paleoclimate kind of sewn into like substrat and some of my different courses there. I knew I didn't want to stare at rocks in microscopes all day, but I thought it was really neat how we could use, at some point, maybe it was during just my basic Earth history class or something, like Geology 101 or whatever it was, like, you know, learning about how we can use isotopes of ancient organism shells to, you know, reconstruct temperatures of the past. And this is how we know we have cyclical ice ages and how that cycle has changed over time. And I thought that was really neat. And I feel like my undergrad courses a lot of them were very broad, and so I didn't necessarily have a ton of like details on any one thing, which I think helped. So I sort of was like, well, you know, isotopes in paleoclimate, what are all the things I could do? Like, how could I form that into something? Like, what are the different research tracks that I could take? And looking into it, you know, I was looking into programs that had people who worked with ice cores and like foram shells and organic geochemistry, which is what I ended up doing. And so there's like a really broad spectrum of things. And, you know, I guess one thing that I always think is useful to tell people is that You don't necessarily have to have a very specific idea of exactly what you want to do. You could just explore things that you find interest you. And I think one thing I did was just kind of reflect on all my classes. I did this in grad school too when I was thinking about what to do after I finished. But every class I took, I kind of thought about what in this class did I find most interesting and like maybe why. And so I think that's kind of the process that like led me there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Cool. So I had, a couple, almost months ago at this point, I had another live discussion with a student in our department, Lisa, and it was sort of about more like deciding to go to grad school in the first place. And so I thought it would be a great compliment to have another one sort of about like, how do you choose to go to grad school, and sort of, what factors go into that decision. How did different people make that decision? And so like I asked you to come on the show, and since you sort of just finished grad school, I'm assuming you, from everything I know, you had a great time. You enjoyed your grad school experiences. Would you say that's right?
Yeah, I think so. I think I did enjoy my grad school experience. I also learned quite a bit about myself and probably my physical and emotional limitations.
Yeah, there's always a little bit of that.
Yeah.
So when you were thinking, at the beginning of this application process, if I asked you to rate yourself on a scale of like how well you knew what you were doing, right? So did you have for example, a good idea that you needed to email prospective advisors, and that you knew like what the application process was like how knowledgeable at that point, say August or something, were you?
Yeah, well, I'd say at the very beginning of the process, I knew absolutely nothing about how it worked. I mean, I think I vaguely knew you were supposed to like contact people to like email prospective advisors, but I had no idea like how to even narrow down how to identify like a department that had research that aligned with my interests. How do I even like form a specific sort of topic sentence about my interests when it was so broad? And so I feel like on the scale of, not knowing anything to being very comfortable, I'd say I was more towards not knowing anything, 0, if we're using numbers. But I think that so what I did to kind of remedy that is I talked to a lot of, I had some peers who had applied for grad school before me, a couple years before me. And so I kind of emailed them just to see. They went into like chemistry, so still a science field, but pretty different, I think, than like a geoscience department. But so I emailed other people I knew had already done it. I Googled, I looked it up. I kind of just, found whatever list of like things to do and a timeline to do them on and like how it works. And I kind of just like looked up as much as I could. And then I felt like I sort of understood the process, even if I still felt like I was kind of, fumbling through it along the way. Like, well, now I have to do this. This is the next step is, so I've like emailed these professors, and the next step is maybe, if any of them get back to me, thinking about emailing their current students to talk to them about how they are as an advisor. And then like, so I kind of had like a timeline set out that I, just had in the back of my brain that I basically got from many different sources. So.
Okay, sort of like the shotgun method, where you're like seeing any advice that you can possibly get from the internet, perhaps, and going with it.
Yeah.
Cool. Did you have an idea, like, could you, This is a weird question. Could you sort of sift at the time and say, okay, well, this is like advice that's good that I should follow, and this advice is perhaps, you know, coming from a different discipline or field, and so it's not really applicable? Like, did you have that level of sorting?
Not really. I wasn't really sure. You know, I think the general process of like identifying your interests and sort of like choosing, you know, people to email, just to like ask whether they have any upcoming projects or that kind of thing, seemed to overarch a lot of different fields. And so at least that seemed like it was pretty straightforward. I don't know if there was anything that turned out to be bad advice because it was from like a totally different field. Yeah, I think I sort of tacked on, I think at some point I tacked on to my kind of like advice, looking for advice and research and that kind of thing, like adding sort of earth science, onto it or whatever, and like seeking out kind of like more natural science related fields and that kind of thing. So yeah, I don't know that there was any like big difference necessarily. Maybe if I think if I were trying to pursue like a fine arts degree or something, it would be very different. Mm-hmm. But I think between some of the different STEM fields, it's more or less the process is very similar. So
yeah. So in those months, in the fall or late August or whatever, that you're thinking about applications, did you have a lot of contact with departments or programs or advisors? Sort of like how much, either with people or like current grad students in those programs, for example?
Yeah, I did. I think I started pretty early because I was sort of like, I think the summer before, it was like definitely before August. I think it was maybe like June or July, because I knew I was going on sort of a personal trip and I was going to be kind of in the area of one of the schools I was interested in. And so I made contact with one of the schools really early, and it was like, I don't know, yeah, like maybe early July or late June or something. And they were like, oh, you're you're really early, but I guess that's good. And they let me just like come visit. They basically let me visit really early. And so I even did the whole kind of like, I met with, other people in the department, my prospective advisor. They showed me around the lab. They took me to lunch. Like I had like a full on kind of prospective student visit, like the summer before, before the application was even due. And so, then I started the process pretty early with that school in mind, but then I also kind of did the same thing with some of the other schools. I think by August I had emailed kind of, a lot of people on my list, on my sort of short list that I had. That was pretty long. And I had already kind of heard back from the ones that I ever heard back from. I had already heard back from by about August or September, I think.
Okay.
Yeah, and so then I kind of, some people just said, I don't have any funding, I'm not looking to take on students, no thank you, good luck. So, but the people that expressed interest in potentially taking someone on, I sort of like asked pretty quickly to email with their current students, and then I would sort of, I don't know that I ever had phone calls with many of them, but I did email some questions to several people that were current students in the programs to try to get a feel for advising styles and also kind of the environment of the department itself, which I think is a big concern, that when you sort of choose where you want to go, I think that's definitely like something to take into consideration, is kind of the department as a whole, it's kind of general vibe, and doesn't seem like it supports grad students and well, and maybe not, seems like some places might foster sort of more of a competitive kind of thing, but and then whereas others are more sort of collaborative. So that's definitely a big thing that I was trying to pay attention to, which is hard to pick up on. I mean, I ended up just asking people directly, and I could definitely, not everyone was willing to kind of be super honest, maybe, but I was asking strangers to tell me kind of what sometimes can be personal things.
Yeah. So, you can still usually find some people who are like willing to spill the tea to a complete stranger.
Yeah. Yeah, I definitely did.
Yeah, I mean, I know like my own experience emailing professors and programs and stuff like that, and I know like there's a wide range of response. So I'm always curious to like see how other people, like what sort of feedback they got or response they got for that whole process. Like I emailed, a lot of people, and like some of them just like never respond, and you just don't even know if they got your email. And then like some people are, the opposite end, where they seem to take a lot of time and they're interested in helping you regardless of kind of whether you go to their school or not.
Yeah, I think I definitely had that full range in my responses. So I think that kind of the two schools that ended up being the two schools I was like really choosing between were sort of had the responses I received were more on the end of like, oh, I want to be helpful, and like, here's as much information as I can give you. Yes, talk to whoever you want. Like, and I think that there was definitely, even some of the other schools I applied to, I feel like there's definitely a correlation between like how much contact I had before the application versus like whether or not I like really got not even just accepted, but like was considered, I think. And so I also had some people say, yeah, you should apply. I might be able to take someone on, you should apply. And then kind of, that's all I ever really heard from them. And that, in a couple of cases, I was really interested in the school. So a couple of those responses, I did apply and never heard anything back, so I kind of wasted my time and my money. But yeah, and then I got a lot of non-responses. I also got a couple that I think I sent like an initial email in August, and then maybe a few weeks later, I kind of sent a follow-up just in case, just to be like, oh, hey, I just wanted to follow up and, see if you are looking for anybody. And then either sometimes on the second one, they would be like, oh, no, I don't have any funding for anyone, or they would just continue to not respond, I had, I think, one person email me back really late. I think it was like sometime, I tried to email them early on in the fall, and then I think I heard back from them like in like November or December or something, and being like, oh, if you're still interested, you should apply. Because maybe they kind of, I don't know, it could be that they dropped the ball, or who knows. I mean, there's all kinds of stuff that may have happened, but yeah, so it was a big range. And I saw in my, research, extensive online research of how to apply for grad school, I saw a lot of advice from professors that receive a lot of those emails saying like, if they don't respond, send a follow-up. If they don't respond to that, they're busy. it's probably because they're not looking for anybody, or, you know, kind of like move on sort of a thing. I don't know if you think that as well as a professor yourself, but.
Yeah, I mean, generally we have a pretty high administrative burden in the sense, like, I just get so many emails that sometimes they fall through the cracks, and sometimes those are the external emails because they don't come with a deadline, they don't come with like something that someone wants me to, you know, do and send back to them or whatever. So so like, and I intend to reply and then I forget, and so I suggest everyone just sends follow-up emails and just assume that it got buried under a mountain of other stuff, because that's just how it works now. So yeah, I mean, so my thought is that this fall contact where you're like emailing people plays a pretty large role in, you know, helping people choose a program. Like, yeah, I mean, on one level, there's like the people who have funding, and then the people who are like, yeah, I'm sorry, I'm not taking a student this year because I don't have funding. There's sort of that, you know, that steers people. But also, like, as you just mentioned, you had really good responses from the two places that you ultimately were like seriously deciding between. So do you feel that is kind of the same, where you got a great response and you were like, yeah, I learned so much about this department because I talked to grad students, I got my questions answered, and now I'm interested in that department?
Yeah, definitely. I think there's only so much you can glean from just like a website. So talking to people definitely made me feel like I kind of knew a little more of what I was getting into. And yeah, I would say that, yeah, the two schools that I was like really deciding between, it was not only prospective advisors that were willing to spend a lot of time, you know, answering my questions or talking to me, but also like all the students I contacted in the department. Like, there was just no shortage of information or advice or anything like that. So yeah, I would agree with that. I think it was encouraging from this sort of person searching, from my perspective, to like receive a response that said, oh yes, we are also interested in you potentially coming here, so let's have a dialogue about it.
Yeah, I think I don't have a lot of data points for this, but I think that varies a little bit with the age of the professor as well. Like someone who's pre-tenure, for example, is like generally looking to take students. They want to encourage people to apply. They might, you know, maybe people don't exactly know that they've moved institutions, and so they're looking for people. They need more applicants. They want to talk to students and see what their deal is. And so like senior professors, maybe they dial that back a little bit, and they're like, because they get generally more applicants already. So that's just my sort of read of the landscape. So when you're doing these applications, it's like late fall or whatever, what sort of qualities are you looking for in a grad program?
Yeah, so, well, okay, I can only kind of speak to my sort of personal method of how it worked for me. So I kind of made a priority list, which is, you know, location was one thing to consider. Cost of living kind of goes along with that, and the amount of stipend that the department can offer you, and which it matters. Also, kind of going along with that, in retrospect, it would have been nice to kind of like clarify whether summer funding would have been a thing that they offered versus having to find, you know, your own funding for part of the year. I think also whether an RA or, you know, talking to the prospective advisor about like the type of funding they can offer, which is like either if I would have to do like a teaching assistantship most of the time, or if there was room to have an RA. That was one of the pieces of advice that I got beforehand that I was kind of looking out for.
Yeah, that whole funding stuff of like, will I be teaching, will I be RA, is there summer funding? Like I had no idea any of that kind of was a thing.
Yeah.
And so I just like completely never asked questions about it. And yeah, so sorry to interrupt, but.
Yeah, so the amounts of pay that you get, you know, it's not usually going to ever be super high, but you can weigh it against kind of the cost of living of where the school is and that kind of thing. So those were both kind of considerations I was thinking of. And then also kind of how, you know, the type of work I would be doing, because it would have been different depending on the place that I chose, you know, because I was looking pretty broadly at like a pretty big field with a lot of people doing a lot of different things. And so one thing was also, you know, I was considering, you mentioned this earlier, but sort of the point of their career that the prospective advisor was at. And sort of one consideration I was thinking was, you know, how much sort of time and attention and, you know, of their resources they might be willing to share with me. Because in the beginning, like I was going into a new field, learning basically, you know, when I started my master's, I was learning everything from scratch. I pretty much knew nothing. So, you know, in the beginning, I kind of needed more advice, more time. You know, the classes helped with like learning some of the base knowledge and that kind of thing. But so yeah, like the vibe I got of like kind of how much what the advising style of my prospective advisors would be, whether it would be like really hands off or, you know, kind of a hybrid of like sometimes hands on, sometimes hands off, or like kind of going with what I might need as well, taking kind of like my needs into consideration. So that was one thing I was thinking about was the impression of advising styles that I got. I mean, I also asked them directly about their advising styles. You can do that. So yeah, those were kind of the main things. Was I really interested in the work? Was I maybe going to be put in a corner and ignored for, you know, X years? Or, you know, would it be more of a kind of a hands-on collaborative experience? Would I have room to kind of pursue, since I don't know exactly what I want to do, would I have room to kind of, you know, pursue different interests, potentially? Like, is there room for the projects to kind of develop later? You know, I don't know if I necessarily thought of it in those exact terms when I was just starting the process, but I think they were sort of tangential to that. Some of this is kind of my perspective as having gone through the process already, kind of reflecting on what I was thinking. But yeah, and then so kind of coming up with the priorities and things that I was considering, and then sort of having a basic ranking of which priority was more important to me and when I would be willing to kind of give in to for one over the other. You know, like location is less important if it means that I feel like I'll have a really good experience in the department or something like that. That was kind of my process.
Okay. So in between like applications, you know, late December, January, and like when people generally decide, which is, I think the deadline is tax day, it's like April 15th. You know, there's a lot more conversations. There's if you get accepted, there's a visitation. There's like, we've asked people to come visit and fly them out. So did your priorities and the things you were looking for change from, say, like fall to spring? Like, were there things that happened on, like, you know, how important were those conversations? How important was the visit? And you were like, oh, I need to rank this this quality higher now that I've understood it better, I guess?
Yeah. I don't know. I think the visit was really important, I guess. I'll say that, like, I mean, ultimately, it's not a secret. Ultimately, I went to U of A in Tucson. And so I think the visit to Tucson, so I ended up driving there because I was coming from just one state over. It was like a short drive, but the visit to Tucson and talking to some of the, current grad students who kind of didn't really care whether or not I ultimately go, I think was really important. It was nice. It was also another aspect that I didn't have with sort of the other visits that I did that I mentioned that I did early where I was by myself, is the visit I had to U of A, I did during the sort of weekend when, all prospective students are invited, whoever can visit in person. And it's like a department-wide sort of thing. And so I also got to meet some of my prospective sort of cohort, grad student cohort. And I remember meeting, some people that I did end up going through the program on that weekend. And I remember very distinctly my impressions of them and that kind of thing. So that was also pretty interesting. I think that was pretty useful too, just to kind of get an idea of like, oh, who are these people that I might be spending the next, few years, like, learning alongside, collaborating with, potentially, like, have as potential colleagues. And then I think visiting gives you kind of an idea of how people feel about the department as well. And whether, people seem like they're generally satisfied with it, or, what the kind of overall vibe is, and how people interact with each other kind of in real life is different than just kind of talking to people over email or phone calls or anything. So I do think that the visits were really important. And I think that, after kind of visiting firsthand, like, potentially I was willing to kind of put sort of specific location a little lower down on my list, and because then I got very excited about certain potential projects and that kind of thing. So I don't know that it changed a ton, but it did help me kind of solidify my decision a little bit. Yeah, it was useful to experience in, like, real life. So yeah, definitely as many visits as possible. Do them all.
Yeah, I think, we always debate, like, how much influence do we have as the department on students who are visiting, like when they come in, the beginning of March, for example. Are their minds already made up? And or do we still have the capability to, if we have them, come here and they're excited about the department, they see all the things we're doing, is that enough to, like, influence them to maybe come and, matriculate after we've accepted them? I don't know. I can only speak from my own experience and then, like, the other couple people I've asked. So I had on my visit, I went to the University of Colorado and I had a fantastic time. Other grad students were awesome. And that's ultimately, like, where I decided to go. And I think the visit kind of, like, it pushed me in one direction, I'd say. In the direction I was already leaning, but it was like, yeah, this is a good choice.
Yeah, and I'm sure there are some people where maybe they kind of maybe they've already made up their mind, but I would say that, like, from my own experience, yeah, the visitation, I think, definitely helped me choose. It was a useful thing, so.
So as you're So you originally entered as a master's student, completed a master's degree, and then in our department you have to like do a whole new application and like reapply to enter the PhD program. So you did this whole process again. Did you actually consider like other schools for a PhD, or was it like really, really clear you were like, yeah, I want to stay at the University of Arizona?
I didn't consider anywhere else. Yeah, University of Arizona was the only place that I applied for my PhD. But because I already knew the department, I was already interested in my research, and you know, I wanted to continue doing sort of similar projects along the same lines and everything. So because I think what it was when I came in as a master's student, you know, I sort of in the very beginning is like, oh, I have no intention of getting a PhD. I just want to get a master's degree and then find a job. But I did end up really liking kind of the research I was involved with and the department. And I had a hard time finding a job after I was wrapping up my master's degree. And so, you know, I kind of applied for the PhD program alongside sort of job searching, and ultimately sort of decided that it wouldn't be so bad to continue to do things I was enjoying doing in sort of an environment that, you know, I was enjoying. So yeah, but I had also decided, I talked with my advisor about potentially fast tracking the PhD essentially, since I already kind of knew some of a lot of the background information I would need and like the lab techniques and everything. So I basically stayed on for the PhD thinking that I would try to do it in, you know, 3 years instead of the full like 4 or 5 or however long it takes. But I had a very clear sort of project kind of very clear projects in mind that I could do that with. So I was pretty lucky for that, because that's not always the case. So
yeah, I mean, so my own PhD was 6 years, and the first 2 years were kind of just like, you know, this very snaky trail of actually trying to figure out what project I wanted to work on and sort of long term and what I could build a thesis out of. Yeah, and the people who come in like where they're very much tied to a project and it's a very clear project and they know that's totally what I want to do, they are much, it takes them less time, basically. They're much more efficient about it.
Yeah, I didn't have to do a lot of searching. So, and some of my chapters didn't all end up being, you know, what I thought they would be in the beginning or the things I was thinking about, but at least the kind of road to get there was a little clearer. Yeah. So
I'm curious, you know, that list of program qualities, the things you were like looking for in grad school, in grad programs. Now, you know, now that you're like 5 years later and you've graduated and, you know, you have a doctor in front of your name, I'm curious, like, what you thought of that list. So are there things that you thought were important back then that turned out not to be important? Or are there things now that you were like, oh yeah, I should have considered this more strongly because it turned out to be important? You know, maybe it wouldn't have changed your decision at all, but like it's something that you didn't think of, you know, back then, for example.
Yeah, I would say things like, you know, if I'm sort of generalizing for people, I would say, you know, the funding situation is important to think about beforehand, and kind of what type of funding you might be able to get, and, you know, even the types of kind of external grants you might apply for, as well as summer funding and that kind of thing. And it, you know, I had kind of my own funding for 3 of the 5 years, which was awesome. But for, you know, the other 2, my situation ended up being very different for the other 2 years. So not that it was necessarily bad or anything. It was just definitely something to consider. And at the beginning, I was thinking I would just come in for a master's, so I didn't necessarily know whether it would affect me or not. But since I did end up staying for the PhD, I had to get I had to be funded longer. So I don't know. I think generally, like you said, you didn't really think about that or ask questions about that at all, because that's not something you necessarily consider before you've gone through a program. So I don't know. I mean, I feel like maybe I would put less pressure on the location, or just kind of looking for a good fit, I guess, which is ultimately what I tried to do. So
yeah, I don't know if you can hear my 3-year-old having a meltdown in the background.
Just a little bit.
So like for me, I didn't, at the time, I didn't consider, say, the grad student cohort to be important at all in my decision. Mm-hmm. And looking back, I ended up in an apartment with a great set of grad students and a great, for lack of a better word, they had a great vibe where they did stuff together. They were sort of cohesive. People were like sharing their troubles, and there was a good group dynamic that like supported each other and stuff like that. And I didn't consider like any of that at the time that I was actually choosing grad schools and stuff like that. So that, for me, that was one thing that I was like, okay, it worked out but yeah. I really should have, if I knew this, I would have weighted that, in my decision.
Yeah, I would agree. I kind of lucked out with that as well. And I was kind of thinking about that. I was definitely thinking about, my interactions with the grad students, like both the current grad students and then on my visits, like the other prospective students as well. I don't know that I was consciously, systematically processing it that way, but I was definitely thinking about it. But yeah, I definitely agree. Maybe if you're not thinking about it, you should, because having not your grad student cohort, it's great if you can be friends, but also you're going to have potential future colleagues and collaborators, and so you want to be able to work next to and with these people. So
yeah, very true.
At the very least.
Yeah, I have, I think, 4 people that I was in grad school with who are professors out of, 50 or however many, probably more than that, who were in the grad program. But 4 that I still, I see them at AGU and we catch up, and one is in a slightly, I'd say, related field, but we're not collaborators, but we talk about the same stuff. We speak the same language basically, and it's fun to see them at conferences and bump into them and see how they're doing, because we're all at roughly the same career stage, which is interesting, which is cool.
Oh yeah. And so even if you don't collaborate on actual science or in your field, a network of people to ask questions with about whatever, I don't know, applying for grants or who knows if you're not. But I'll say, I don't know who's watching this, but I'll say that I lucked out and I, made a lot of friends in grad school as well. So being social is a good way, trying to make time for social activities is good, I think, and helpful during the grad school experience. So,
yeah, you have to see all those people every day at work and stuff, and it's helpful if they have if there's a lot of camaraderie and collegiality, and they generally want to support each other.
Yeah.
So if we're thinking super general, for some student, and we're trying to put a ranked list together about important things that people want to consider when they're choosing grad school, what sort of things would you put on that list? So I'll give you an example. I think advisor is like one of the most important choices you can make. Like you're going to work with this person for 5 years. So is your work style compatible with their work style? Like, do you have, how good are your interests, like overlapping interests? If you need a hands-on kind of mentor, are they going to have the time to actually give you that mentorship that you need, that sort of thing? So I'd put advisor pretty high.
Yeah. I would agree with that. Advisor's probably high. It is, at the same time, it is kind of difficult. I think that's why trying to make contact early could be good, even though, professors are very busy and can't always meet to talk with you or answer all your questions. But especially if, you're not already their student at the beginning during the application process. But I would say, yeah, advisor's very high. And along those lines, one thing to consider is kind of thinking a little, you don't need to know exactly what you want to do necessarily, but thinking a little bit about the types of careers that you might be interested in and interested in eventually pursuing, or that you could see yourself doing, and whether or not those are within an academic space or not, and sort of having a conversation with a prospective advisor about, kind of your overall goals with the program and where you might see yourself being, I think is a useful conversation to have pretty early before, accepting somewhere even. It would be good. So that's another thing to consider as well. And, and I don't know. I still don't know, I'm done with grad school, but I still don't necessarily know exactly where I want my career to end up. I'm kind of winging it at this point, but I am just kind of like, I generally know some things I don't want to do and some things I'm interested in, and I'll kind of just sort of learn as I go, kind of as the path develops, which I think seems fairly common. It's okay not to know exactly what you want to do, but to think a little bit about what you might see yourself doing, and your different options, I think is useful at that stage, definitely. And a good conversation to have with a prospective advisor. So I think ultimately the department, so the advisor in the department, kind of the vibe and the types of resources that you might have there in terms of funding, support for career development and research, and the types of lab spaces that might be there, and whether you'd be able to do all of your lab work on site or not, and that kind of thing. And then I think location is good because some people want to stay. Part of my location consideration was also proximity to family. And whether or not I wanted to be closer or I was okay being a little further away from family. And that was that ended up getting pushed down a little bit, but ultimately, but it was kind of definitely high on my list in the beginning, I would say. Funding, your interests, the type of projects you're interested in, and whether they would be doable there, which a lot of this stuff comes down to your advisor and conversations with them. So I guess it all goes back to that. But it's kind of hard to know what, from both perspectives, I think, a prospective student and a prospective advisor, to know what you're getting yourself into, if you don't have multiple conversations before sort of applying and accepting and everything. So,
right.
Just a few email exchanges or whatever, and a Skype call, it can be difficult to really know. So,
yeah. So, like one of the differences, from undergrad to grad school is like a lot of people choose undergrad, based off of some sort of reputation of the university as a whole, for example. And maybe the department if they know what major they want to do or whatever. Would you say they're important at all? Like, university or like how the department's viewed reputation wise or whatever, or
I'm still kind of figuring that out. I feel like I don't know that it's in reality how important it actually is. It was something I was thinking about in the process of applying, like, because U of A, the Department of Geosciences, has a pretty good reputation, I would say, and fairly well known for a lot of different things. And so there is some recognition there that I think does open doors. And I found maybe like, in networking or talking to people at conferences or even just like within certain settings, I think it's like a good jumping off point that people are like, oh yeah, that University of Arizona Geosciences, do you know X, Y, and Z? Or like, what are you doing there? Or like, that's a good department. Like, so some potential open doors down the road, but I don't know if I've felt like too many benefits from it exactly. But maybe I have and just don't know. I don't know.
Yeah, I think you get a slightly larger network. Like if you go to meetings or something.
Yeah.
But I don't know. I think like it's probably reflected in maybe the average student in the department, like grad student of like, like I think we get really high quality applicants and the students are like, went through undergrad and did a great job and they're like super into research and stuff. And so I think our grad students are great. And so like they're doing good work. They're working on interesting problems. And so I think that's probably where it's not reflected in like the amount of money that we have to throw around because we're not, it's not like we have more money than other schools or departments or anything like that. And I think ultimately like it doesn't matter a whole lot. At least I haven't found it matters a whole lot. Like people, for example, like people remember my advisor, but they don't necessarily remember my university as like my department is great because like since I graduated there's been decent turnover, and so like the department, even my undergrad department, is almost completely different because a lot of people retired and there's been turnover, and so like I'm associated with the department as it was like 20 years ago, if that makes sense, which is kind of I'm assuming it's still good, but like you never know. So I'd also say location. I didn't actually care about location. I wanted to get from New York. I went to undergrad in New York and I wanted to get out of New York. So anywhere but New York was kind of my location. I'm trying to think of what else would go on this list. We've covered like a lot of things fall under the heading of advisor. And I also have already mentioned like the grad student cohort. I think is pretty important. One thing I always tell people on these visits, like you've been accepted to a place, you go visit them, or even maybe before, like are the other grad students there happy? Like do they generally have a good outlook and quality of life, or do you just go somewhere and like all the grad students are miserable because I don't know, some variety of reasons where like it's not a great place for them or something. I don't know.
Yeah,
when I visited Colorado, I was like, everyone here is like super happy and they're all like they've managed to carve out part of their life outside of work, and so they're not fully 100% associated with their job, and then you know, all the problems that can come with that sort of thing. So they're doing, you know, mountain biking, skiing, all sorts of hiking, stuff like that. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. And I think, the way that you kind of figure that out is, you know, talking to the grad students that go there and visiting and, getting the feel for things. I would say like one thing that drew me to the department at U of A is that a lot of, you know, I didn't talk to a ton of the current grad students that, you know, I hadn't already talked to, because also, you know, I was one of the first 2 students that my advisor took on, and so I didn't have someone who had directly had my advisor already as a mentor and could like tell me some direct things. And so I think I had to kind of like talk to other grad students that were also in paleoclimate and who maybe, you know, had her on their committee or as an instructor or anything like that. And so so that was also kind of interesting. But yeah, generally my visit to U of A, I think one thing that drew me to the department was the grad students that I talked to all seemed to kind of more or less get along with each other and, you know, kind of have, like you mentioned, sort of have their entire being did not revolve around work and research necessarily. A large portion of it did, but that's inevitable. Yeah. So I think that's good. Yeah. Good advice.
Is there anything I'm forgetting about I think we covered most of it, like things that you'd want to consider. I've been trying to think of something else, but I haven't come up with anything.
I think all the big ones that I ever thought of, I think we talked about.
We do have one question from the chat from Lisa.
Okay.
Lisa would like to know, how would I know if I should do a master's or a PhD? And then she clarifies, that is, should I get a master's before my PhD, or would it be okay to go straight from undergrad to a PhD?
Oh, actually, okay. Well, Lisa's question, which I hope I will answer, reminds me of another thing that I was considering that I had forgotten after, you know, since the 5 years that I took between applying and actually getting my degree. So when I was applying, I was initially applying as a master's student, and I did mention I did not want to I had no intention of getting a PhD. I wanted to do a 2 years master's degree and get a job and kind of be on my way. And so one thing I was taking into consideration was how that was received by prospective programs and advisors, because not everyone was crazy about that. I would say that I had a lot of people, you know, say that they would prefer, you know, prospective PhD students, or like they would prefer it if I would apply for a PhD program instead. Because I think part of it is, I guess part of the thinking is maybe, you know, they want someone who's going to be around a little longer and can get more done potentially. I'm not sure. Yeah, so I would say that like from that perspective, the 2 schools I was sort of choosing between, and U of A, I think was really high on this part of kind of my consideration, is that applying for a master's degree was not seen as like a bad thing,
or like second tier.
Yeah. And so at no point like during my program did I feel like I was considered sort of like lower down, you know, since I was lower down in the hierarchy or whatever in the line, since I was a master's student. Because it was like once you were there, you know, we were all in it together and everyone's basically operating at the same level. So, that was a big consideration. So yeah, definitely advice to consider is like if you are, you know, wanting to do a master's, you know, people's reactions to that will be different, and that is one thing to consider. So, and I guess to Lisa's actual question of, which I think is how should I get a master's before a PhD, or how do I know when to apply for a PhD versus a master's? Is that right?
Yeah, I think she's sort of asking, like, is it kind of required to have a master's before a PhD? Like, how necessary is it, I guess?
Yeah, well, I would say on paper it's not necessary, I think, for the most part. Across the board, I don't think it matters necessarily. But I can speak from my personal experience. I think doing my master's degree and like having like learned a lot and like the fundamentals of the lab work and, you know, those types of proxies I was using and all the different techniques that I needed to know, having learned and completed an entire project in that 2 years, I think set me up to like really take advantage of my PhD program in a way that I don't think I would have been able to if I had just gone straight into a PhD. But you know, everyone's experiences are different, I guess. And so I think it just kind of like, you know, I went in wanting to get a master's degree because I've never really been interested in academia as a career path. And so everyone was telling me that, you know, if you get a PhD, that might overqualify you for some things. And honestly, I don't really think that's the case. But a lot of advice I did get was, you know, you pursue PhDs if you want to be a professor. And I don't necessarily think that's the case because there are a lot of people with PhDs and not a lot of professor jobs. So, and I think it can be what you make of it, but you can still do like pretty high level science, or even if you get a job in a different field, like I'm transitioning to a whole different field now in, you know, after my degree. And so I think that ultimately getting any kind of higher degree just sort of signals to you that you're able to learn and can be like a good employee. And you are an expert in certain things, and it's all about transferable skills. So this is getting into the actual like career realm. But I don't think a master's is necessary for a PhD, but I did find it very useful personally. I feel like going straight into kind of a PhD program would have felt really overwhelming because the first year of grad school can be it's hard. I mean, grad school's hard. So I feel like my first year of grad school was difficult and rigorous, right? And so at times it was like overwhelming. It was like, oh my gosh, like, you know, but for me it was only like a 2-year commitment versus, and it was a way to like test out if this was something I wanted to keep pursuing versus like, oh, I signed myself up for this for, you know, 4 to 6 years. Like, can I really do that? So I think it kind of depends on, you know, it depends on the person and your personality and what your ultimate goals are. But I feel like I would recommend maybe pursuing a master's. It worked out for me and I thought it was a good test run, but if you already know what you want and you want to go for it, then there's no reason you can't go straight into a PhD.
So I went straight into a PhD because I kind of knew that I wanted one. But I would say, from my experience, I would say like I should have taken a year off and gotten like some job, and then done something a little less stressful. And then, because essentially, sort of towards the end of my first year, I was like burning out already because it was just like straight undergrad into PhD, and I was like, you know, holy shit. So at that point I was like, man, I really should have like taken a year off and gotten some job somewhere and like done something and then gone back to it after that. Because I think it kind of just resulted in some wasted time and like burnout that I probably didn't need to go through. But you know, I would agree with what you said. Like if you're unsure of a PhD, obviously a master's is a great choice. If you're transitioning fields, if you're a little uncertain like what you want to work on, also master's is great for that. Helps you get a lot of perspective on like what the disciplines are like and what the state of current research is like. Yeah, I mean, my PhD was 6 years, and I wouldn't have been, if I obviously had a master's, it would have been shorter than that. So you're kind of doing the same amount of time, I think, on an aggregate level. It's like 2 years, 2 plus 4 is still the 6 that I spent anyway, so I don't think it's hugely different. Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, on top of that, like, I stayed at the same institution for my PhD as I got my master's, but not everybody does that. You always have the option of trying something slightly different, or looking for a change of location.
Mm-hmm.
So I know some fields, like I have some friends who are in sort of the ecology realm of things, and sort of biologists, and they've told me that they always receive the advice that they shouldn't get their PhD at the same place where they did their master's, that people will think that that's strange or weird, but I don't think for like geoscience related stuff, like I don't really think that's the case. I don't see why it would be the case.
No.
Yeah, I'm not.
Yeah, for us, we have our department has a rule. You can't get all 3 at the same place, undergrad, master's, PhD. They have to be different. So like if you're an undergrad, we typically don't accept them into our own grad program. We tell them to go somewhere else, and vice versa. Like, well, I guess there's no versa, but like, so we want you to have separate, separate undergrad and grad degrees. So hopefully, Lisa, that answered your question. Lisa is our only synchronous viewer, so that's the only question we have.
Hi, Lisa.
But yeah, Grace, I'd like to thank you for your time today and having this discussion. Hopefully it was helpful to people, talking about the things that you'd want to consider when you choose grad school, and like what sort of things you find important.
Yeah, I hope so too. And so, if you're thinking about grad school, it can be done. Yeah, I did it. So, yeah, but no, thanks, Chris, for having me on. This was fun, and yeah, hopefully it was useful and coherent.
All right. Well, to any viewers, if you enjoyed this, check out my other videos, and if not, I'll see everybody next time. Thanks for tuning in. All right, Grace.